are live. My name is John-Paul Berg, and this is The Way Forward, a weekly podcast regarding Douglas social credit and monetary reform. I'm joined with my co-hosts, Dr. Oliver Heydorn and Andre Meloche, and tonight we will be discussing the left versus right slave dialectic. That's what I call it, and UBI versus a national dividend. So with that said, I'll hand it right over to you, Dr. Oliver. What are your thoughts on the conventional left-right spectrum? Do you feel it's organically occurring, this division, or do you feel that it's being kind of fomented presently?
Well, right before we came on tonight, we were just talking about the Hegelian dialectic and problem, reaction, solution. And I think both, if you look at the conventional economic spectrum, so where you have, let's say, socialism / communism on the left, and on the right hand, you have what's called laissez-faire capitalism, but which really devolves into some form of crony finance monopoly capitalism. Or if you look politically, if you look at, let's say, totalitarianism on one extreme and anarchism on the other, I think in both cases, what's happening is we're being offered a range of options between two extremes, and both extremes are fundamentally incorrect. They don't solve the economic problem. They don't solve the political problem. And hence, if those are the glasses that you've got on, that's been given to you to look at the range of options, to conceive the range of options, then so far as you remain within that framework, everything that's offered to you, the two extremes and anything between them in the conventional spectrum, is not going to resolve the issue. It's a false answer. And not only that, but you will never be able to discover the truth, because the truth in both cases goes beyond the conventional spectra. So what ends up happening is you end up dividing the population into two or more groups that are pitted against each other. And they're all fighting over which one's false answers should win the day. And in the meantime, the powers that be, the man behind the curtain, is benefiting, whether the left happens to win or the right happens to win, or what we end up with in practice is some mixture of let's say, both capitalist / socialist elements, or what was referred to as capitalist or socialist. And the overall effect of that is to centralize power in the hands of a few, and more specifically, from a Douglas social credit perspective, it's in the hands of the owners and operators of the financial system, of the financial software, that power is being centralized, whether left-wing or right-wing, or some mixture of these policies is being introduced and imposed on the population. So it's it's really important that people start to think outside the box, that they sort of reject these glasses of the conventional layout, because these conceptions are just deliberately misleading, and will prevent all of us from getting together, discovering the truth, and actually moving forward with constructive political and economic solutions for our social problems.
Yes, it's really the perfect way to pit us against one another. I've done a lot of research on this, and I mean, we're genetically predisposed to a certain temperament. I mean, there's environmental externalities that affect our temperament, but for the most part, that's something you can't control. And then we're temperamentally predisposed to having these political leanings within this left-right spectrum. Those high in orderliness and conscientiousness tend to lean to the right, and those high in creativity and openness tend to lean to the left. So the higher people are in those two traits, they become the extremes of this dialectic. Now, and what they've done with this, the way it's presented in modern politics, is it's in line with a two-party system that embody the ideology of either side. And it's they play us off against one another. I call it almost like a strategy of tension between each other. And it's the relation between this is how they really affect our trajectory. It's something people really have to understand if we're going to see past it. Because I believe, I think our problems lie beyond that. It's monetary policy, and I think we get trapped in this left versus right slave dialectic. And right quick before I hand it over to Andre, the reason I call it a slave dialectic is I've done some research, and during the in the American South, there was slave plantations where there was a lot of slaves and there was like one family. So they found a psychological trick to play them off against one another. And what they would do is they would advantage one group over another. So you had one privileged group over another. And that just by its very nature fuels that tribalism within people. And the dynamic takes over and they can't see past each other to see that their problems are the people in the plantation. And that was an efficacious way to kind of keep them in a perpetual state of division. And that's what's occurring with this left-right slave dialectic in our political system. What are your thoughts, Andre?
Well, first of all, left and right, the concept is quite old, refers to the French Revolution, with the left side of the house and the right side of the house, which were at the time the revolutionary people and the monarchists at the time. But there's also, a modern way to see the dialectic. The dialectic of Hegel also is supposed to be, it's supposed to integrate the antagonism. You have the thesis, antithesis, and you have the synthesis. And you're supposed to go back and you bring back what you left behind, because you always integrate what I would call heritage. In modern world, we're always discarding the past, trying to discard the past and going toward the future with the progress. If we refer to what we call right capitalism, based on John Maynard Keynes or Adam Smith, and they always refer to the invisible hand of the market. And I always make jokes. I said the hand of the market is in your trousers pocket, versus the left socialism, it's not your pants. So you're stuck either way because somebody's digging in your pants, somebody is digging in your pocket, manipulating you and trying to make you transform you into a weapon, by, for example, subsidizing your company or making sure that you will have a public contract, and you are used as leverage. When you go into the left socialism, it's one person against another. Everybody's equal, everybody's poor. The government owns everything, but in reality, it's not true, because the example we have with Soviet Union was what we were calling the servant of the people, which was the Communist Party, was an elite that was running the system, the regime. And you could not criticize it. If you would criticize it, if you're not part, for example, of the Komsomol, which were those associations, and we can refer maybe to Douglas, the right for association. But at the time, you had to be part of an association. It was mandatory. And if you were not part of it, forget it. You will never have a flat. You will never, you will have a job, but you will never be able to rise in society. And that was a big problem. And the main goal was to make people compliant. They had to comply to be able to either survive or flourish. Whether you're on the right side of the spectrum, what you have is like Oliver mentioned, laissez-faire, which means it's a far west. Very little regulation. We think about the Reagan-Thatcher era, when they started to deregulate the market, which was after that completely controlled and hijacked with inside trading. Try today to be a small business trader on the market. You will never succeed unless you do inside trading and you have insight. And we can refer to what Trump did in the last 2 months, 3 months. Every Friday night he was starting to announce that they had an agreement, and then suddenly you see the price of the Western Texas Intermediate fall. On Monday morning he was threatening Iran to attack them. So a man at this level of power should never do this. So this false dialectic that you're mentioning, John-Paul, will confuse people. Where do you stand on the spectrum? On the left side of the spectrum, because maybe you prefer civil liberties, you prefer what I would say individual freedom. But what is quite ironic is that on the right side, you also have individual freedom, the right to entrepreneurship. So they're both played against each other, like you were mentioning, and we're stuck between them. We're in the middle, and if the left pulls us on the left, we have this natural tendency to resist and try to go back to the right, or at least to the center. And it's the same thing with the right. So I see the tendency of the right and the left to have this Manichaean discourse. It's either us or them. I remember 2001 after 9/11, George Bush with the Bible. It says, either you're against us, you're with us, or you're against the terrorists. So everybody who's not agreeing with me is a terrorist. That was quite, I would say, simple-minded, if I can say. So this dialectic will trap a lot of people, and they're not aware that they are played against each other.
Well, it's kind of like parameterizes the conversation with this false binary. So people think it's one extreme or another when really it's irrelevant, and it's the primary mechanism which they utilize to manipulate our behavior. This is how they keep us from seeing past the real problems, essentially. And the way it's manifesting itself now, it's to an extreme. It's like the far left and what's characterized as the far right in Canada. Like, we have a lot of nationalist groups that are far right, and they're going to war with these far left Antifa groups. It reminds me of like the early 20th century in Europe. Like, we've come full circle, and here we are. What are your thoughts, Oliver?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's like there's nothing new under the sun. It's just the same game that is being played over and over again in different forms. One of the things that Douglas said in one of his writings was that it's very difficult to convince the public that fascism versus communism is just the old party game in a new dress. In other words, it's always the same thing, right? You've got the two extremes. You've got the conventional center, and they play both sides against the middle. As far as where does Douglas social credit sit in terms of its economic views or its political views? I like to say that it represents. We have to characterize it in reference to the conventional spectra. I would say that it represents the radical center. So it's something that's above and beyond the conventional false economic spectrum and the conventional false political spectrum, right? And the whole point of it is to resolve conflict. It is possible if you choose the right ends and the right means in the design of, let's say, the financial system, the economic system, the political system. It is possible to resolve conflict in the common interest of each and every citizen, right? And the only group of people that would be put off by that, or who would stand to lose from that, would be oligarchy, right? And they represent essentially a parasitic type of life form, if you will, right? So it's very important that we recognize that metaphysically, evil is always parasitic on the good. It requires the good in order to exist, right? So you can have an individual, for example, who's completely healthy. It's conceivable. I don't know that there are too many people in the world that would fall into that category, but it is possible that somebody could be completely healthy. And then you can have varying degrees of sickness. But what you cannot have is, let's say, total sickness, right? There's got to be a little bit of health present in order for there to be any sickness at all. And when an organism becomes too sick, it dies, right? So it's the same thing when it comes to society. There is health in the existing society, some degree of health, because if it were not so, it would fall apart, it would cease to exist. What we're trying to do in the social credit movement basically is to increase the health, to improve the health, to move society in a more constructive, positive, healthy direction. And in doing so, the evil dimensions, let's say, the oligarchic dimensions, will be atrophied, right? As a necessary consequence. It's kind of like going into a room and turning on a light. The darkness vanishes, not because the light is fighting the darkness as such, but once the light is there, there's no room for the darkness, right? So once health is present in a person, or health is present in a society, there's simply no space, no energy, no opportunity for evil. And yeah, as long as we remain within, conceptually, and in terms of our political action, as long as we remain within the conventional spectra, it's going to be very difficult to see a clear way forward where we can recover societal health.
That's one of the biggest things that intrigued me about Douglas social credit when I was initially learning about it is, in my estimation, it obliterates the categories. It obliterates the parameters of these false dialectics, and it actually it cuts to the core of the problem, the deficiency in the market. Now, when this is resolved through Douglas social credit, I mean, going back to the conventional spectra, we could still present this, because this is how people interpret politics, but we could present this in both ways. Like, this should be appealing to the left and to the right. Like, there's big selling points for it, so to speak. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, Oliver was mentioning, radical center. We try to be moderate in our, I would say, understanding of reality. Michael Jones, Dr. E. Michael Jones, is referring to two concepts: categories of the mind and categories of reality, which the left and the right, traditionally speaking, are categories of the mind, because we all have an idea of what would be the left, what would be the right, what are the values of the left, what are the values of the right. I was mentioning civil liberty. We never really defined the word freedom. Hannah Arendt is referring to the freedom as the freedom of its institution. Institutions are supposed to be free and fair, so people can act and live within a certain boundaries, common good, without undermining natural law and individual freedom. And this is not what we're seeing actually, because we are observing a war between two extremes. And again, I think we're between crossfires, and we try to say, wait, ceasefire. We have something that could help solve, poverty, inequality, that would undermine the monopoly of banks, creating money out of nothing. I want to start a bank today, and I would call it the risk management banking system, greeting loans without interest and making people understand that if they are risk, we will share the risk together. Douglas, with the dividend and the discount, this system is very well built, because it shows that you can achieve equilibrium, but you have to monitor it. Today, we do not monitor nothing. We can look at the stock market. It's quite fascinating. Again, I refer to this index, the volatility index. Some people, they make their living out of this, because the volatility index is so high today. The world is so not certain that people are afraid, and people, they play on this. So I think, in a sense, the doctrine of Douglas is trying to stay, like Oliver was mentioning, in the center, always bringing the left and the right together in the dialogue, which is a task. It's a real challenge, because many right-wing hate left wing and vice versa. So we have to be more diplomatic. I know it is not very sexy to say diplomacy today, because many people they will just promote a hard line, whether it is for immigration or a national border. But it doesn't work like that. It's more complicated. It's through debate that we have to do this, and we're losing it. We're losing the debate because the left and the right are polarized. And I think maybe what we're trying to do here with this podcast is try to centralize the debate so people can exchange ideas without, I'm sorry to say this, but killing each other.
I'm muted. I'm good at that. To essentially to look past this division, I mean, we have some serious differences. I'm not trying to trivialize the difference between the traditional left and the traditional right, but I think it's inconsequential comparatively. When you look at that, like, we're all the change that enslaved modern man is monetary policy. It's the scarcity we live in. It's the way the system is designed with the debt and everything. And what's unique about Douglas social credit is it benefits both sides, even within the framing of the conventional spectrum. And that's why I think this is just it's the answer. I truly believe that it's the way forward. To get the quote in there, I would like to take a moment before I pass it over to Oliver. If I could appeal to the audience, we're very suppressed. For some reason, believe it or not, people don't like this certain message that control the algorithm. So we're deboosted, and we're very much reliant on organic growth. So if you could all share the stream, it's very advantageous. Go ahead, Oliver.
Yeah, so we were going to talk a little bit about Douglas's proposal for a national dividend, and we can discuss what it is, what it's not, and compare it with, let's say, a conventional universal basic income, which a lot more people know about that. But I think what I wanted to underline first is the fact that the national dividend is a prime example of something that can be used to resolve conflict between the conventional left and the conventional right, because in principle, it should appeal to both sides and to anybody anywhere in the middle, right? So imagine that a proposal that everybody could and should get behind, right? So what is the national dividend? So according to Douglas's analysis, because of the way the conventional financial system is designed, it's always generating costs and prices at a faster rate than it's simultaneously distributing incomes to consumers, in the form of wages, salaries, and dividends. So there's this chronic underlying deficiency of consumer buying power. And the existing system has to compensate for this, obviously, because if it doesn't, certain goods and services are not going to be sold, businesses will go bankrupt, they'll have to lay people off, and people will suffer because they won't be able to purchase a certain percentage of what's being produced. So because it's basically a debt money system, the only way the existing system can fill the gap, or the main way, is to rely on government deficit spending, business borrowing more money for expansion, or consumer credit, mortgages, student loans, car loans, lines of credit, credit cards, etc. So Douglas said, we shouldn't fill the gap with debt. We should, first of all, figure out how big the gap is, measure it, and then we can monetize it with debt-free credit and distribute it. And one way of distributing the money needed to balance the flow of incomes on the one hand and the flow of costs and prices on the other is this proposal for a national dividend. So this would be an income that would be delinked from work, right, independent of work status, and everyone in the society would get it, right? So if you're a citizen, every 2 weeks, every month, you would get a certain amount of money, debt-free credit, issued by, let's say, the National Credit Office. It could be, $1,000, $2,000. I don't want to put an exact figure on it, but the idea basically is that we are all rightly regarded as shareholders in our society. And on that basis, we should all be drawing a dividend whenever the society is profitable. That is to say, whenever there is this surplus of goods and services being produced with insufficient income being automatically distributed to meet or to offset the costs of what we're producing. So that's in essence, that is the proposal, right? This is not the same thing as a conventional UBI, a conventional universal basic income, and we'll explain a bit more later on, but that's the proposal, right? One of the proposals, one of the main ways of filling the gap.
I keep doing that. It's unique. It's essentially enfranchising the citizen. It's like an example of capitalism, even though it's not conventional capitalism. But as being a shareholder, as being a citizen, then you should share in the surplus. And under this system, you would. But at the same time, it distributes some income, but it doesn't. There's no monopoly on the credit creation, so it's not like equality. People, if they're entrepreneurial, if they want, like, it's pro free enterprise, like, it's the best of both worlds. And once you start to understand it, you can't look at our problems in any other framing. It's all encompassing. It really does take over your conceptualization of these issues. What are your thoughts, Andre?
Oliver was mentioning, the national dividend, and I could refer to the heritage, the human heritage, all previous invention or discoveries that we should all benefit. And I will refer to the copyright. The copyright means that after 75 years, all copyright goes into public domain and it is free of royalties. In theory, we should have access to all this knowledge for free and without any fees, unless you have fees if you need to borrow a book, or you need a membership in the public library, or you need to subscribe because you need to have the file online. But outside of that, it should be free. I remember Google many years ago with the Google project of digitalizing all books on the planet. I'm sorry, books that you will never digitalize because they're not accessible, and you can refer to the ancient books. But not only that, then you understand that Google wanted to create a monopoly on knowledge. And it's the same thing with money. Like I was saying earlier, I cannot start a bank today. In Canada, it's illegal. I cannot say I will start a bank. I would be like Elon Musk, $1 trillion, and I would start to grant some small loan. We had this concept many years ago, microcredit. And it worked up to a certain point because they were trying to lend money to people without interest or with very little interest to cover the cost of the management costs. And that was about it. But then after that, it derailed because you always have a bigger fish that eats the small fish and tries to manipulate the market. We have to be able to implement the national dividend and the national discount with safeguard. Safeguard meaning, like Oliver was mentioning, monitoring how it works. The national dividend is not fixed forever. It fluctuates with the productivity of the country in terms of goods and services. If we are rich in terms of goods and services, the income has to be at least equal so you can produce and, like Oliver always mentioned, liquidate this money and make it, having a certain balance. I think today the system is so unbalanced that people are not aware that they don't even understand that $1.3 trillion just in Canada is unsustainable. The system in itself is not only deficient, it fails completely. And you would arrive with a socialist approach where you will nationalize the means of production, you will control all the economy, the government It will not work because you will create a huge bureaucracy, and this bureaucracy will finish by being corrupt and will control the level of labor, the level of subsidies. So I think, in a sense, it could the doctrine of Douglas can appeal to the left and can appeal to the right, because it's neither capitalism nor socialism. It's something completely new, and unfortunately, it was obliterated for 100 years. This is quite fascinating, and I'm sure that a lot of people know about the doctrine of Douglas. They know about it. They don't want this system to be known by ordinary citizens, because if they understand the principle of it, they will say, well, it's common sense. And we always refer to common sense. It's common sense. You have to make a balance between what you produce and what you consume. And if you have this balance, everybody's happy. Oh, bankers, they will not like this at all, because we start to dig, or we start to challenge their monopoly. I think our job is to try to describe this system and make it appealing for people. They could understand, first of all, after that, they could understand the context that we are in actually.
Yes. The truth just hits different. And that's what I was trying to allude to earlier. Once you understand this, it just makes sense. It satiates the necessity for logic. Like, it makes sense. And compared to our present system, it makes a lot of sense. So with that said, as you were mentioning, there are a lot of interests that don't want people to be educated regarding Douglas credit. So we're very much deboosted in the algorithm. So if you guys could please share this stream, it's very advantageous for us. So with that said, we actually have some clips set to go to explain the national dividend. This is an animated clip. Let me just bring it up here. And we're going to play it. It's about 3.5 minutes, and then we will discuss it briefly.
Episode 12, The National Dividend and Leisure. We are often told that if people were given an income independent of work, that they would refuse to work and the economy would collapse. But what if this isn't necessarily true? According to the social credit analysis of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, it is possible to provide an income to everyone that would be indexed to the economy's productivity and would rise or fall depending on the size of the price-income gap. The national dividend is the second mechanism that Douglas proposed for increasing the real purchasing power of consumers so that we would not have to rely on ever-increasing debt. It would be a periodic, say monthly payment to each citizen, whether he be employed or not. This would allow the economy to embrace a policy of the minimum employment necessary in lieu of the present policy of full employment. Those individuals whose labor was no longer required in the formal economy could nevertheless retain access to goods and services via their dividend payments in conjunction with compensated prices. If they wish to supplement their incomes further, they could engage in the delivery of home-crafted goods and personal services on a community basis outside of the mainstream economy. Social credit's dividend proposal is not to be confused with a conventional UBI, or Universal Basic Income. Unlike a fiscal UBI, it is not financed through taxation or an increase of public indebtedness, but through monetary reform and the creation of debt-free credit. It is also not a guaranteed amount like the UBI, but is determined by how much additional credit is needed to bring incomes into alignment with the flow of consumer prices after the compensated price discount has been applied. Nevertheless, it is anticipated that the national dividend would provide people with enough money on a monthly basis to meet the basic costs of living and would thereby provide a minimum level of economic security to everyone. If too many people decided to loaf and attempted to live off their dividends alone, the size of the dividend would decrease as production decreases, thereby indicating the need for more labor inputs. The release from artificial economic pressure and the provision of increased leisure time is bound to fundamentally alter the structure of civilization and the tenor of its general culture in the direction of authentic progress. people who have both the time and the means are in a far better position to make use of their creative impulses. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit. For more information on Douglas Social Credit, please visit socred.org or socialcredit.com.au. Be sure to like this video and please subscribe to our channel.
Okay, so do you want to provide a little more context on that, Doctor?
Sure. So Andre mentioned one thing already. One of the features that distinguishes the national dividend from a universal basic income, and that is the fact that unlike the conventional UBI as it is generally conceived, the national dividend is not a guaranteed amount, right? We're not stipulating that every month, for example, everybody is going to get $2,500 or be assured of at least that level of income. As far as the social credit system is concerned, what the national dividend will be depends on what the economy can afford. So it depends on the size of the gap. If the gap is large, then the dividend payments will be larger. If the gap becomes smaller, the dividend payments will become smaller. So it's not a guaranteed amount, right? It's all about the financial system accurately reflecting reality, right? And but closely connected with that, there's no conventional financing going on here. The minute that we suggest, for example, giving people a national dividend, some people have this idea, oh, well, this is just it's just universal welfare, or it's redistribution. But the dividend is not financed within the parameters of the conventional financial system. It requires the Douglas social credit monetary reform. So it's not redistributive. We're not robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's not like the system that we have now, where if somebody's on welfare or somebody's getting, let's say, unemployment insurance payments, it's because we've all paid into the system through our taxes. There's no tax financing going on at all. There's also no debt financing. We're not funding the dividend through a continual increase, let's say, in the public debt. This is instead fresh money issued free of debt, that's nevertheless issued in reference to existing debts in the productive system that cannot be paid with the incomes that have been distributed. So we have to add to the flow of purchasing power. And it's something that's again, it's outside the normal range of options. You have to think outside the box to understand what's really going on here. Now, why is this a good thing? Well, the economy needs people to have an income delinked from work, because otherwise there are goods and services we can't sell. Businesses will not be able to survive. They'll go bankrupt, or they'll have to cut back. They'll have to lay people off. And on the other hand, citizens need to have this extra income because they're not paid enough to buy back in full whatever we as a community are producing. And this is not, there are different ways of conceptualizing it, but this is really a matter of strict justice, right? If, as a community, we have, in the course of a year, produced $100 million worth of goods and services, if the financial system were properly designed, if it accurately reflected the physical reality, then whatever we produce in physical terms, we've already paid for it physically. We've handed over the raw materials, the labor, the technology to bring these goods and services into being. If we've paid for it physically, the financial system should allow us to pay for it in financial terms with sufficient income and without having to go into debt. So right now, by requiring us to go into debt in order to purchase a certain percentage of what we've produced, it's a great injustice to everybody. And so that starts to give us some indication of how the national dividend serves the interests of both left and right. Because if we had it, well, guess what? Those middle class, upper class, they wouldn't have to subsidize people through welfare, unemployment insurance. All that tax is going to disappear. All the bureaucracies necessary to introduce and monitor and apply these sorts of programs would disappear also. So we don't have to tax anybody, and that should be good news to the right. And those who are not as well off, who struggle to make ends meet, they're going to have what they should have. What they should have as a matter of right as shareholders in their societies and economies. They're going to have an income delinked from work. So it's and that's going to help to eradicate poverty and exploitation, because you'll be able to buy what you need. But apart from that, if you don't like how your employer is treating you and you have a dividend, you're in a much stronger bargaining position to say, these work conditions or this remuneration is not going to make it worth my while. So, everyone will be in the same position because we'll all have dividends, and the market's going to have to adjust. So that's a good example of how it serves the interests of both sides of conventional politics and should help to resolve the conflict between them.
And when you say it can't be understood within the conventional framing, I think a good way of saying it is we're shifting from a scarcity mindset to one of abundance. And one thing that this scarcity mindset, this perpetual state of scarcity that we're in within this market, it's terrible for beauty. Like aesthetically, like the architecture is drab, everything is streamlined for cost efficiency, and we lose some of the best parts of being human, which is expression, creativity, like was mentioned in the animation, and beauty. Like everyone, again, they just it necessitates, the scarcity necessitates efficiency. And it's taking away from the aesthetic, which kind of it's really depressing. Like there's a lot of people, cultural commentators that comment on how drab the architecture is and how that kind of demoralizes an individual. It almost stagnates your soul in some regard. But with this model, we could bring back beauty and creativity to everything. It's a fundamental shift from scarcity to abundance. That's why it's hard to understand within a scarcity mindset. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, you're right, John-Paul. Scarcity is artificially created. And what that creates, it creates anxiety in people. I can say even for rich people, they would be afraid, for example, they're afraid, they will never admit it, but they're afraid to be excluded from their social group. And this can happen to anybody. I remember a couple of years ago, some very rich people went bankrupt because they went against a certain lobby that I will not mention, and they were immediately attacked because they were not complying with the system. It can arrive to anybody, including rich people. And the fact that we create this artificial scarcity, it is to control people. Oliver mentioned something. The income in the system of Douglas would not be a bargaining or a negotiating argument, because you would have enough money to sustain your life, to sustain your family, and you could say, let's negotiate on the real working condition. Bad working condition, bad safety, bad security, long hours. For people who would work in a system like the doctrine of Douglas, they would most probably see their working condition improve, which would satisfy, I would say, the traditional left, who's always supposedly advocating for the rights of worker, which I'm not sure it's still true for the actual left, but the traditional left was always defending the worker, the working class. And they are always using, union were built on that, using income as a leverage to be able to increase the purchasing power of the workers. In the system of Douglas, this would probably disappear, because you would not have to use income as a negotiating issue.
Yes, it's like when we talk about like wealthy people still being under this system, it's like rich people are still subjugated under this financial oligarchy. They have upgraded accommodations, but they still have to live in a society that is dysfunctional relative to these problems. The disparity in wealth, the inequity, it's a big destabilizing factor, especially presently where the middle class is being eroded and the working class is essentially being strangled in this economy. That creates the conditions for social strife for sure. And we're being hit from multiple angles, because at the same time, in all of the Western nations, there's the division that's coming in from the homogenous countries that have been balkanized because of the weaponized mass migration. So it's almost like a tinderbox condition presently. And we just need that precipitating event to kind of create the catalyst for something really dark in a way we definitely don't want to go. So this, in my estimation, is a viable and pragmatic alternative, considering the trajectory that we're approaching. So with that said, we got about 60 people watching. We're very down compared to the first few episodes. So if I could appeal to everyone to please share the stream, it's very helpful for us. With that said, I'm going to play the other video. We have another video, an animated video that differentiates between a national dividend and a universal basic income.
Episode 22, a national dividend versus a conventional universal basic income. We are sometimes told that a universal basic income and social credit's national dividend are essentially the same thing. But what if this isn't true? According to the social credit proposals of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, the national dividend, while bearing certain superficial similarities to a universal basic income, nevertheless differs in a number of fundamental ways. Like the UBI, the dividend is universally inclusive. It covers each citizen by being distributed to each citizen. Like the UBI, the dividend has no work requirement or means test. It is issued unconditionally. Note well, however, that it is certain that any UBI proposal implemented as part of the Great Reset will not be unconditional, but will involve intolerable impositions that no one should accept. However, there are three key differences between a conventional UBI and the national dividend. Unlike the UBI, as it is commonly conceived, the dividend offers no guarantee that the citizens' incomes will not fall below a certain level. The national dividend is indexed to productivity and can rise or fall depending on the size of the price-income gap. Large gap, large dividend. Small gap, small dividend. No gap, no dividend. The dividend may or may not be sufficient to meet the basic needs of citizens. Although, in the case of a mature, highly industrialized economy, it is expected to do so. Unlike the UBI, which is typically conceived as a government program that must operate within the confines of the existing financial system, and that therefore involves redistributive taxation and/or increased public indebtedness, the national dividend is inextricably linked to a program of monetary reform. That reform aims at a systemic rehabilitation of the economic and social orders in the direction of improved functionality. As we have seen repeatedly throughout this series, social credit contends that there is a gap between the flow of prices and incomes. The present financial system seeks to fill that gap by injecting additional debt money, whereas social credit proposes that the gap should be filled instead via the issuance of debt-free credit. Some of that debt-free credit would be injected in the form of a dividend. Just as a private company may distribute its profit to its shareholders in the form of dividends, so too can a nation monetize its macroeconomic profit and distribute the usufruct to its citizens. The national dividend thus promises to deliver the result which most basic income supporters are seeking: the abolition of poverty for all practical intents and purposes, but without directly penalizing anyone else or increasing the public debt. Finally, unlike a certain number of conventional basic income proposals, the dividend is not tied to full employment as a fixed policy. If an economy is physically capable of providing everyone with all of the goods and services that they need to survive and flourish without calling on the full capacity of the available labor force, then the amount of the dividend need not be restricted so as to artificially maintain the positive incentive to work. The fewer the labor hours that are physically necessary to provide for our genuine needs, the better off we will all be, because we could then enjoy the decrease in the need to work in the form of increased leisure. This, in addition to the various other benefits that are associated more generally with the social credit monetary reform. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit. For more information on Douglas Social Credit, please visit socred.org or socialcredit.com.au.
Okay, Oliver, did you want to speak to that one to provide some context?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that we haven't yet talked about that is quite important has to do with the nature of technological labor displacement. So, you can go back a few centuries. We've developed tools. Why? Well, because they make production easier. It makes it easier to produce more or better with less effort. And, we have, since the Industrial Revolution, power-driven machinery. And this keeps on developing. And now we've got automation and, AI and so on and so forth. So as technology replaces labor, as a feature of the physical development of the economy, two things are happening. One is the gap between costs and prices on the one hand and incomes on the other. That gap is steadily growing, because when you input more machinery into the productive process, you are introducing more and more capital costs, costs of financing the machinery, depreciation, maintenance charges, etc. It's really capital costs that are driving the gap in the first place. At the same time, you're also throwing people out of work, right? Machines are doing more and more of the work. They're responsible for more and more of the production. So the end of this is that we don't need everybody working. We're actually physically capable of producing everything that we need with only a certain percentage of the labor force actually being employed. So the national dividend solves two problems at once. It meets these capital charges with debt-free credit, and it also gives an income to people whose labor is no longer required in the productive system. So it's beautiful, it's elegant that way, because you're killing two birds with one stone.
Yes, it's like the animated video kind of alluded to this. Like a socialist style universal basic income could be leveraged so people comply with a certain orthodoxy. And that's one of the things, because it still has that monopoly of control with people, but a national dividend wouldn't function that way. And with that traditional UBI where it's leveraged, if you don't go along with the orthodoxy of the party that's in power, then you could be penalized by exclusion from your money. And that's socialism in a nutshell right there. That's one of the major flaws with these systems. It's not compassionate. It's just control, essentially. But give me one moment here. It's all in order to make people more compliant, and that's the Chinese social credit. And if you watch those animations on everyone, they have to differentiate because Chinese social credit stole Douglas social credit's entire name. And this is a big problem because they're not merely different, they're entirely antithetical. So it creates a lot of confusion with this system, and it's one of the things that created some initial confusion with me personally. So, I mean, that's definitely a big problem. What are your thoughts on this, Andre, the UBI compared to the national dividend?
Well, the UBI, like Oliver was mentioning, is fixed and is provided by the government with debt or taxes, which is not what Douglas is proposing. Then there's one thing that Oliver mentioned, the innovation that we have, and we have a lot of power driven machinery, but those machineries, they need energy, and the energy sector will always stay there. So you will need worker, you will need essential worker in some sector, meaning that other people will be free to develop other type of skill, other knowledge. You were mentioning beauty, to be able to appreciate and create beauty in a society that needs beauty. The other thing I noticed is that we were talking about full employment. UBI does not discard the idea of full employment. And people usually they mix leisure with laziness. As soon as you are not working, quote unquote, you're considered lazy. And I think there's a lot of people who are attached psychologically to this simple phrase, I love my work. Well, you have some people who love their work, but I would be surprised to see if they were really honest, would they really admit that that they love their work? Some people are doing hard work like drillers and some work that you linemen and public utility. Those job will practically never disappear with innovation, except if you use drone. But even then, in a high storm, you cannot send a drone; it will not work. I have experience at Hydro-Quebec, de-icing electrical power line. They have some technique, but you still have to send linemen. You don't have this type of technology, and most probably it will never happen because the weather will never permit it. This is reality. But people, they have this tendency to confuse leisure with laziness. And I think if they would understand that the system of Douglas, leisure means providing people with time. It's the only thing we have, time. So this time they could develop their skill, their abilities, and they would enrich the society. This is where monopoly does not permit, actually.
Yes, and it's within that conventional framing, like I was kind of characterizing it as this scarcity mindset. That's what people would characterize it as. Oh, well, you're just lazy. You don't want to contribute. And you have the old pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of an ethos. Now, that's presented to a lot of people within the confines of this false binary of socialism or capitalism. It's like you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. There's no alternative because if we were to equalize anything, it would be socialism. It would be bad. So again, they're existing within the parameters of this false binary, and that prevents them from being able to escape the scarcity mindset to interpret the difference between leisure and what they would call laziness.
Right. I just,
So what are your thoughts,
yeah,
Oliver?
I just wanted to add that it's interesting that if you look at the conventional economic spectrum, both the socialists and the capitalists and anyone in between, they're all committed to a policy of full employment. Isn't that interesting? Right? Now ask yourself, if physically speaking, in Canada in 2026, we can produce everything that we need for people to survive and flourish with, let's say, only a percentage of the available labor force actually working, does it make any rational sense to insist on a policy of full employment? Right? It doesn't. It's waste. It's sabotage. You're insisting that jobs must be created because the system demands that everybody has to work for a living. No one's getting a dividend. And economics is supposed to be about efficiency. It's supposed to be about getting the most for the least, right? The biggest bang for the least amount of input. That's efficiency. Well, if we can produce everything we need with just I don't know what the exact figure would be, we could ask AI. But if a certain percentage of the population is all that we require, and we don't need everybody working, what sense does it make to insist on a policy of full employment? It only makes sense if essentially you want to maintain a pyramidal slavery system, right? Where everybody's got to clock in, clock out, everyone's got to have a job. And if you look at the jobs that do exist, a lot of them serve no real purpose. They're witless, useless, redundant, or destructive. They're waste, they're forms of waste, they're examples of economic sabotage, but they are a requirement of the system as it is designed, right? And it's rationally, it makes no sense if you look at the economy and say, well, what is its real purpose, and what is the easiest way of achieving that purpose? Now, if you want to enslave people, if you want to keep people so busy that they can't think about politics or cannot really develop themselves, then you have full employment in a system that doesn't require full employment, and you invent all sorts of jobs, all sorts of occupations that at the very least, they make no sense, or they contribute nothing, and worse off, or the worst case scenario would be where they're actually creating further chaos and friction and problems, which happens. So when we in the social credit movement, we talk about leisure, we're not talking about idleness, and we're not talking about leisure in the sense of living life as if it was a permanent vacation, although there's nothing wrong with going on vacation. What we mean by leisure is having the freedom, the economic freedom, to decide for yourself how to profitably spend your time. So there are many, many things that you can do outside of paid employment that are meaningful. And even now, even under the existing system, it's been estimated that maybe 50% of all work hours are outside of the narrow field of paid employment. So if you think of all the production of goods and services that occurs in the home, the making of meals, cleaning, looking after children, looking after elderly people, sick people, volunteer work, there's a lot of production that's going on that no one is being remunerated for. And the national dividend would be one way of recognizing all of that work, which is not superfluous. It's essential work. It's so essential that if everyone who was working for free went on strike tomorrow, the society would collapse, and all those people in the big banks and the corporations and the government who are, at the top of the societal pyramid, they wouldn't be able to continue, because they are in fact dependent on all of this free labor outside of paid employment. So there's so many things that people could do and would do in their communities, in their families. The arts and the sciences would flourish, and that's what we mean by leisure. That's what we mean by a leisure state, or having a leisure society. The philosopher Josef Pieper said that leisure was the basis of culture. If our culture is going down the toilet, one major reason for that is we don't have leisure anymore. Everyone's too busy working, trying to survive, as if that was the be-all and end-all, the very purpose of human existence.
And that goes back to the lack of beauty in all aesthetics that we're seeing, this drab design everywhere. But also, just to contrast with what we're talking about, and they're all super relevant points, but for the industrious amongst us, you could still work really hard in the Douglas social credit system. You could put in the work and get ahead if that's what you desire. Like, it's truly the best of both worlds. And that's what I think is so appealing about it. That's what really resonated with me to get on board with this appeals to the conventional left and the conventional right. And in my estimation, it obliterates the necessity for the categories. So with that said, we actually picked up a bit in viewership. We're up about 110 viewers. So if I could get you guys to all share it, maybe we could get to 210. Maybe we can even get to 300. So I will appeal to you guys if you can. It's very advantageous for us. I think we lost Oliver, but we're going to start looking at some questions here. I'm going to bring them up. I'll read them out, and then we'll go to Andre and then Oliver when he comes back.
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We just can't see me.
We lost your visual. You went.
Somebody's turned off my camera.
Those pesky bankers.
Remotely. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go through the questions here quickly. So we have one from Bob Lior, who I believe knows the answer to this, but can a collectivist be a social creditor? I don't think it's possible. In my understanding of social credit, it's anti-collectivistic. So no would be the quick answer there. Do you have anything to add to that, Andre?
Well, collectivism, common good. There's no private property. The common good first, and that's it. I remember in 2021, the MPs and the MLA were referring to people, they have to fulfill their duty and have the shot. Suddenly, they were putting the duty up front for the people, for the mass, but not for them. So that was common good for us. So collectivism, in a sense, is not it's not freedom. It's not freedom. And you can refer to the commune in the peace and love movement with the hippies in the 60s. They were living all together, sharing everything, and they were rejecting authority. If it would have worked, the system would have been implemented, but it disappeared suddenly because you need beauty and order. So I think the short answer is no, it is not possible.
I think so too. Do you have any thoughts to add to that, Oliver?
I quite agree that, as collectivism is generally understood in English, that would mean any kind of economic political order where the individual is illegitimately subordinated to the group. So that could be communism, that could be fascism, that could be conventional socialism, that could be national socialism, that could be big business collectivism, sort of the economic order of the Whig. Any sort of system that subordinates in an illegitimate fashion the individual to the group would be collectivistic, and philosophically, and in terms of policy, we are 180 degrees away from that, because Douglas's idea is that the group exists for the benefit of the individual members, and the group is there, and institutions are there to serve the individual, every individual who is a member of an association.
Well said. So we have Sue Kellen Dyer. Bonjour. Bonjour, Sue. And we have Common Sense Sherlock, who reposted the stream. It is common sense to repost the stream, so I would appeal to you all to do so. So we have Payman Ascari here with some fashion advice, Andre. Your tie evidently does not go with your shirt to Payman's expectations. So,
well, considering what is Payman, he has very bad taste. So I will take it as a compliment. Well,
it's also the scarcity, right? You don't have time to color coordinate when we're under such economic pressure with this scarcity system. So we have Canada Waltz. Really feel Elon gets a little too excited about robots replacing people. I just decided to invent new industries instead of getting into robotics or studying UBI. Dividends are cool too, though. So do you have any thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, I think he's right. Getting excited about AI and about robots. Oliver's always mentioning, innovation that will replace or displace labor. It's good in the sense that if you supply people with a decent income, And this is not what we're seeing, for example, with data center and AI that are replacing, I'm sorry, scholars who are taking loans up to $100,000, $125,000, thinking that when they will get out of university, they will have a lucrative job. It will not happen. What do you do with those people? So I think he's right, deciding to invent new industry, innovation. And for that, you need minds. And mind need time. That's the reference with leisure.
Do you have anything to add to that, Oliver?
Yes, I want to stress as well that, from a Douglas social credit point of view, it only makes sense to replace people with robots if it improves the quality of life. We don't believe in doing this just because we can. In other words, there might be many, many jobs that, although we could perhaps replace people with robots, we don't want to. I mean, do you want a robotic nurse? Do you want a robotic massage therapist? Probably not, right? So just because we can do something doesn't mean that we ought. And not all technical progress actually serves to improve the quality of life. So we look at things, not merely from a quantitative point of view, but above all from a qualitative point of view. And we have to ask ourselves, what kind of a society do we want? Some things, it's better to have machines do it because maybe the job is dangerous, or maybe it's incredibly monotonous, or maybe it's really unpleasant. But we're not in favor of transhumanism or anything like that. There needs to be limits. We want a human civilization. We don't want an anti-human civilization.
Nor do we want a transhuman civilization, which
Right.
is all the rage presently in some of these elitist circles. So we have another one from Bob here. I see a strong reformist impulse in DSC, but limited to a central flaw, abolishing the monopoly of credit exercised by the tiny bankster clique. What are your thoughts, Andre?
Well, abolishing the monopoly of credit, I think that's one of the main goal of the doctrine. Of course, the Douglas social credit will face challenges because a lot of people will go against that. You start to challenge their power and their monopoly. So you have to develop strategies to convince them, not to antagonize them. And the reform of the Douglas social credit today should be to not to modernize it, but to explain it simply so people could understand that the actual two options that we have, socialism or capitalism, don't work. They just don't work. And I think Douglas was seeing this 100 years ago.
I think that's right. I think it would be implemented incrementally too. It wouldn't happen overnight. And the first step of this is educating people on it, because it has been memory hold, unfortunately, and it is a very logical movement. It stands on its own merit. So, and that's what got me involved personally, is I really have a desire to explain this to people because it provided me with a lot of clarity, and it provided me with what I see as a viable option moving forward. What are your thoughts, Oliver?
Yeah, so we do want to break the private monopoly on credit creation, but we want to do it for the sake for the sake of filling this recurring underlying price income gap, right? So right now, it's because they have a monopoly, it's the private banking system that fills the gap, and they do that for the sake of furthering their own interests. It's the centralization of wealth, power, and privilege. And so Douglas is basically saying, we can and should break the monopoly, fill the gap with debt-free credit for the benefit of the common citizen instead. So that's one way of looking at it, is that the private banking system is the main beneficiary of the gap, and way the present system fills the gap. But in fact, that is a great injustice. It should be the common citizen who is the main beneficiary. And we can achieve that by breaking the monopoly with the issuance of debt-free compensatory consumer credits, and the dividend is part of that.
Makes sense. So we have one from Payman Ascari. Last week you said even with debt-free state banking, there was still a deficiency. Where does that go? The rich? Well, the deficiency is handled by the National Dividend in along with the national discount. That's what actually handles the deficiency. Is that right, Andre?
Well, you have to balance the production of good and service for the needs of the people, and you have to make sure that the financial system will reflect the physical economy, which is not the case actually. So when Payman is asking where does that go, this deficiency goes to the top of the pyramid because they create the small structure creates false scarcity, fake scarcity to pressure the system. This is leverage. They use leverage all the time to keep their monopoly on a system which is emitting credit.
Oliver, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so the deficiency as it exists is filled right now with debt, right? With debt money. So the credit monopoly, as I was just saying, is the main beneficiary of the deficiency at present. And yes, if we had, let's say you replace the existing system with a complete debt-free state system, you're still going to be generating costs and prices faster than incomes, just because of the nature of capital costs, right? Every time that you import some sort of machinery or equipment into the productive system, you're generating, capital expenditure charges and operational expenditure charges. And this requires businesses to demand more from the consumer than they simultaneously distribute to the consumer in the form of wages, salaries, and dividends. So that's the real core of the A plus B theorem, what we call the A plus B theorem, has to do with the nature of capital cost. And so that exists even if there's no interest charged, and even if all money was debt-free money, there would still be a gap that's generated.
Makes sense. So we have another one from Bob Lior. As John Hargrave aptly put it, the social credit national dividend is, in reality, the wages of the machine. And this is kind of what you were talking about, Oliver, when you say all of the advances in technology, who benefits from these advancements, which are really a collective endeavor of humanity when you think about it. A lot of the people that made these advancements are long dead. And it's essentially this parasitic banking oligarchy, international finance, that reaps the rewards of all of these technological advancements made by humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, there's one thing, as I was mentioning Google, Google project. And we saw some initiative in the last, I would say, 20 years with Creative Commons, public domain, the archive.org, where you have all the text. Sometimes you go and find some books, texts that are part of public domain. That's why I refer to public domain. Oliver was mentioning the private banking system. It is not new to see that the private banking system has a monopoly on mind, money, and finance. This is not normal, and I think Oliver mentioned it. It's not fair. So the wages of the machine would be, if machine do all the work, we should all be in a state of leisure, and we should enhance our mind and create more, and then we would maybe create more beauty than functionalities.
Anything to add to that, Oliver?
The wages of the machine basically is the idea there is that if it made sense to pay a machine for the work that it does, then the machine would have money with which to meet the costs that are incurred in machine production. But of course, the machine has no need for consumption. So by giving people a national dividend, we're basically putting on the other side of the equation the purchasing power, the income that corresponds to the costs that the machines incur. And so, yeah, one way of thinking of the national dividend is, these are the wages that it would be given to the machine if it made any sense to pay wages to a machine.
That makes sense to me. So we have another one from Bob here. It's more of a comment. What's appealing about social credit is the denial of wage slavery as a precondition of existence. People of all political stripes can get behind that. That's the big thing. It's like ultimately at this point in history, do you want to be subjugated under a dictatorship of the proletariat in some socialist society that's identical to being in a technocratic fascist style society underneath the monopoly of credit by the bankers? These are two extremes and they're virtually identical. So, I mean, that's the most appealing thing presently, is this is one of the only ways to avoid this in a practical regard. What are your thoughts, Andre?
Well, like you always say, new neo-feudalism, I think the system of Douglas would free people. Again, I say free people for their time and their mind. I think we are all slaves today. We thought that we would free ourselves from slavery, but we just changed master in the last 100 years.
Do you have anything to add, Oliver?
One of the things about socialism is this idea that we will improve the situation or arrive at some utopia if everyone becomes proletarian, right? So if everyone becomes part of the working class and doesn't own anything, we're somehow making life better. But the idea of social credit is that actually we should all be property owners. We should abolish this idea that it's any way good or proper for some people to be completely disenfranchised and dispossessed. And the solution to that is not to extend it. Rather, in other words, we don't want to make more people dispossessed in the name of making us all equal. Rather, we want to make everybody richer, right? Not necessarily to the same level, but we want to enfranchise as many people as possible as shareholders in their society. So once you do that, once you have a society of property owners, well, you don't have slavery anymore, do you?
That's a good point. So we have one from Johnny Tightlips here. If one is not in pursuit of the latest technological advancement, example, robotization of everything possible, will one fall behind, though is generally the counter argument. You want to tackle that one, Andre?
Well, that's one of my favorite. They always use argument that if we don't do it, somebody else will do it, and it's quite funny because where's the ethic in that? That's not a moral or a philosophical argument. It's just the way most people are either ignorant or coward. They just don't want to argue or debate or justify their position, and they will just hide behind the compliance of the group. The group does it, so I have to do it. Where's individualism in this? Where's free thinking? Where's individual thinking? I don't see this. So this argument is a false argument.
And do you have any thoughts, Oliver?
I guess the question arises, well, what does it mean to fall behind? I suppose an argument could be made that for the purpose of national defense, if there is a belligerent power somewhere in the world, we might have to develop certain technologies that we wouldn't otherwise develop, but mainly in order to maintain our sovereignty. But as I said before, the main thing that we're looking for is to enhance the quality of life. And so, if other societies decide to go along the path of robotizing everything, I think that robotizing things that in the nature of things probably shouldn't be robotized, I think they'll suffer a lower quality of life, and they'll look at our society with envy, and their citizens will say, well, why don't we do it the way they do it? Because look, they're happier, they're more fulfilled, they're more satisfied, they have a more human society. Look at the culture that they're developing. Why can't we compete on that level? Right? Not everything is about technical progress.
Some of the worst conceptions of humanity, some of the worst inventions came with the similar framing. It was a race for with the Soviets for the discovery. Well, actually, really with the Germans for the nuclear weapons, the Manhattan Project. I mean, presently, that's how AI is being framed. We all have to build these data centers to compete with the Chinese. It's ultimately a race for the bottom, and it keeps us in this perpetual state of division. And it really gets us nowhere. It's really frightening. If we're going to have to stay that divided in order to advance, I don't think we're advancing. I think we're degenerating. Let's see what else we got here. So another one from Payman Ascari. Fundamentally, is the issue leading to a deficiency greed, the legacy of industrialization, or something else? I'll let you start that one, Oliver.
Yes, so good question. And it's vitally important to understand that the purchasing power deficiency that Douglas identified in the system is a technical problem. It's not a moral problem. Right? It has moral implications, but in and of itself, it's technical. It's because of the way the system is designed. Right? So one thing that I like to say is that even if society were populated with angels and saints, you bring all the angels and saints here to Canada and you say, run the economy, they're still going to be producing this deficit in consumer purchasing power because that's built into the mechanism, into the financial mechanism as it presently operates. And so it's vitally important that people understand that this is, yes, there's a moral dimension to this, there's a huge moral dimension to this, principally because, well, how do we address this technical problem? But the origin of it is technical. And Douglas was an engineer. And he said, if the purpose of production is to deliver goods and services, well, the mechanism is not properly designed for that end because it doesn't automatically give us enough buying power to meet the costs that are simultaneously being generated. So it is a product of industrialization in part because with industrialization you have technological labor displacement, you have capital, machines and equipment becoming more and more important in the process of production, and with that, capital charges grow relative to labor charges, which increases this price income gap. But it's not because people are greedy. Even if there was no greed, we'd still have a problem. The greed enters because those who are in a position to alter the system for the benefit of all citizens on an equitable basis by supporting monetary reform won't do so because they are quite happy with the centralization, the artificial centralization of wealth, power, and privilege, which accrues to them when you fill the gap with more and more debt.
Yes, it's from my understanding, it's a systemic, like the deficiency is systemic. It's a flaw in the market. And then we have a banking oligarchy that utilizes that to their advantage. They take advantage of this existing deficiency. So that's essentially my understanding of it. Andre, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 with the Titanic sinking, and some people were against the creation of the private Federal Reserve. Oliver was mentioning saints and angel. Let's say you have all saints and angel in Canada, and I can refer to Orwell, Animal Farm. You will have some saints and angel that will be more saints and angel than others, meaning that you will have people that will be maybe more demonic than others. They will try to take advantage of the system. If you don't have a monopoly on minds and credit, you will remove this desire or this behavior for greed, for greed.
Well said. So with that said, we're towards the end. We hit the hour-and-a-half mark. We do have about 148 watching. If I could get you guys to share it, it's very beneficial for us. Do you have any parting words, Oliver?
I would, again, encourage people to take the time, to invest the time and the energy to come to a proper understanding of Douglas's diagnosis. What's wrong with the financial system, because it affects everything. It's not a problem that is limited just to finance or economics. A lot of things in society are affected directly or indirectly by the nature of the financial system, the nature of the financial software on which we run the society, on which we run the civilization. And there's so many implications that go beyond just banking or economics. I know there are political implications, there are environmental implications, there are social, cultural implications, there are implications for international politics and how countries relate to each other. So there's whatever your issue of concern is, Douglas Social Credit has something to contribute when it comes to elucidating what's causing the problem and what can be done to solve it, or at least alleviate it.
Do you have anything to add to that, Andre? Any parting words?
Well, Manichaeanism actually is dividing the left and the right. And I think that if we can bring people to the center for a debate and a discussion, we will have to rely on fact. The actual system doesn't work. The actual capitalist system doesn't work. And we have we have an history of socialism that did not work. Everybody is equal, everybody is poor. That does not work at all. And I think the idea of Douglas was quite simple. He's an engineer. He studied the fact. He studied the fact, and he arrived with conclusion based on fact, based on his training or education as an engineer. This is maybe what we're trying to do, bring reason into the debate.
Well said. So with that said, I will appeal once more, and I'm sorry it's so repetitious, but the only reach we get is organic. So if you could please share this stream, if you think you know anyone that might enjoy this type of content, please send it to them directly. It's the only growth we get. And we will see you guys next week. We do this every week, Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for coming out, guys. Cheers.